Third chapter, first phase of Indian national movement. Dadabhai Naoroji presented which famous theory in his paper Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, Drain Theory. Methods used by early nationalists were assertive in approach but within the framework of law. Assertive in approach but within the framework of law. Where were the three P's of early nationalists? Petition, prayer, petition, protest. Prayer, petition, protest. Which of the following was the aim of early nationalists? Formulation of popular demands to be presented before the government. Formulation of popular demands to be presented before the government. Next question. Which of the following was a demand of early nationalists? A large share of Indians in the governance of the country. A large share of the Indians in the governance of the country. Which of the following administrative demands were made by the early nationalists? Increase in the powers of local bodies. Increase in the powers of the local bodies. Which of the following reforms was a result of the efforts made by early nationalists? Simultaneous ICS examination in India and England. Which of the following reformations was a result of the efforts made by the early nationalists? Simultaneous ICS exam in India and England. Which of the following was achieved by Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a member of the Imperial Legislative Council? Reduction in toll tax. Which of the following was achieved by Gopal Krishna Gokhale as a member of the Imperial Legislative Council? Reduction in toll tax. Next question. The early nationalists initially believed that the British wanted to be just to India but were unaware of the real state of affairs. In this context, which of the following statements are true? And they believed that British rule had many benefits, and they believed that the main obstacle in India's progress was not the British colonial rule, but India's own social and economic backwardness. So the early nationalists initially believed that the British wanted to be just to India but were unaware of the real state of affairs. In this context, which of the following statements are true? They believed that the British rule had many benefits. They believed that the main obstacle in India's progress was not the British colonial rule but India's own social and economic backwardness. Next question. Dadabhai Naoroji, London India Society. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Servants of Indian Society. Dadabhai Naoroji, London Indian Society. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Servants of India Society. Next question. Read the two statements given below and select the option that shows the correct relationship between A and B. The early nationalists believed in moderate politics. এটা assertion reason they asked for constitutional and other reforms within the framework of British rule. তো বলছে বি ইজ দ্য রিজন ফর এ, মানে আর্লি ন্যাশনালিস্ট যে বিলিভ করতো মডারেট পলিটিক্সের উপর, সেটা তার জন্য রিজন কি ছিল? দে আস্কড ফর কনস্টিটিউশনাল and other reforms within the framework of the British rule. Next question. The early nationalists created national awakening among the people that they belonged to one common country, India. এটা assertion reason হচ্ছে the early nationalists drew the masses into mainstream of national movement. কি বলছে assertion the early nationalists created national awakening among the people. National awakening তৈরি করেছিল that they belong to one nation that and one country, that is India. আর early nationalists কি করেছিল? drew the masses into the mainstream of national movement. কিন্তু আর্লি ন্যাশনালিস্টরা একদমই মেইন স্ট্রিম অফ ন্যাশনাল মুভমেন্টে মাসাসকে টানেনি, তাই এ হচ্ছে কারেক্ট আর বি হচ্ছে ভুল, মানে অ্যাসারশন কারেক্ট, রিজন ভুল। A few government officials attended the first session of the Congress and took part in deliberations. এটা assertion. আর বি হচ্ছে British officials later on criticized the Congress and branded its leaders as disloyal. babas and violent villains এগুলো বলেছিল। কি বলেছিল? British officials later on criticized the Congress and branded its leaders as disloyal babas, BABUS, disloyal babas বলে দিয়েছিল কংগ্রেসের লিডারদেরকে ব্রিটিশরা, আর ভায়োলেন্ট ভিলেন্স বলে দিয়েছিল। আর এটা রিজনে দিয়েছে, মানে বি স্টেটমেন্ট বি তে দিয়েছে। এতে কি বলেছে? a few government officials attended the first session of the Congress and took part in its deliberations. কয়েকজন গভর্নমেন্ট অফিসিয়াল, বি কন্ট্রাডিক্টস এ। বি তো কন্ট্রাডিক্টস এ বটেই। একদিকে বলছে গভর্নমেন্ট অফিসিয়ালরা ফার্স্ট সেশন অফ কংগ্রেসে যোগদান করেছিল, গভর্নমেন্ট অফিসিয়াল মানেই ব্রিটিশরা হবে। আর তারপরেই বলছে ব্রিটিশরা ডিসলয়াল ব্যাবাস বলেছিল, ভায়োলেন্ট ভিলেন বলেছিল কংগ্রেসের কিছু কিছু লোককে। তো এটা অবশ্যই মানে কন্ট্রাডিক্টরি কথা, পরস্পর বিরোধী কথা। Next, number 4, the British followed a policy of granting minor concessions to put down the growth of nationalism. British follow করলো policy of granting minor concessions to put down the growth of nationalism. এটা একটা স্টেটমেন্ট, ব্রিটিশ ফলো করলো গ্রান্টিং মাইনর কনসেশন, আর the British realized that the growing unity of the Indians posed a major threat to their rule. তো বি ইজ দ্য রিজন ফর এ, মানে বিটা হচ্ছে এর রিজন। এতে কি? পলিসি অফ গ্র্যান্টিং মাইনর কনসেশনস, মাইনর কনসেশন দেওয়া শুরু করেছিল। তার কারণটা কি ছিল? তার কারণ দ্য ব্রিটিশ রিয়েলাইজড দ্যাট দ্য গ্রোয়িং ইউনিটি অফ দ্য ইন্ডিয়ান্স posed a major threat to their rule. মানে এরা যেহেতু বুঝেছিল, বি যে মানে ব্রিটিশ যেহেতু বুঝেছিল যে ইন্ডিয়ানরা তাদের করেছে, সেই জন্য তারা কনসেশন চালু করেছিল। তো বি ইজ দ্য রিজন ফর এ। Next question, short answer questions. Which period of the national movement is known as the period of early nationalists? Name any three leaders of the Congress who are known as early nationalists. The first phase of the early nationalists were of the early nationalists 1885 to 1905 of national movement is known as the period of early nationalists. Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Firod Shah Mehta, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Firuz Shah Mehta, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya. These leaders of the Congress were known as early nationalists. Mention two reasons for the early nationalist faith in British sense of justice. The early nationalists believed that loyalty to the British government was identical with loyalty to their own people and country. They believed that the contribution of the British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. They believed that continuation of the British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. Two reasons of the mentioned two reasons of the early nationalists' faith in the British sense of justice. The early nationalists believed that loyalty to the British government was identical with loyalty to their own people and country. They believed that continuation of British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. Next question. What was the belief of early nationalists during the British rule in India? The early nationalists were a band of loyalists. They were proud of their British connections. They had faith in British sense of justice and fair play. The first session of the Congress ended with three cheers for Hume, and Hume answered with three cheers for Her Majesty. Majesty taki, the Queen Empress. They believed that Englishmen would grant home rule to the Indians when they would come to know of their will. They relied on solemn pledge given in British government from time to time. In fact, their criticism for the government was also based on dignity and moderation. So, belief of the early nationalists, the early nationalists were a band of loyalists who were proud of the British connections. They had faith in British sense of justice and fair play. The first session of the Congress ended with three cheers for Hume, A.O. Hume, and Hume answered with three cheers for Her Majesty the Queen Empress. The Queen Empress. They believed that the Englishmen would grant home rule to the Indians when they would come to know of their will. They relied on the solemn pledge given in the British government from time to time. In fact, their criticism for the government was also based on the dignity and moderation. Next question. What, according to early nationalists, was an obstacle in India's progress? What kind of self government did the early nationalists demand? According to the early nationalists, the main obstacle in India's progress was social and economic backwardness of the Indians. The early nationalists wanted a larger share in the government of their country, India. Their demands for constitutional reforms were conceded in 1892 in the form of Indian Councils Act. They believed that eventually India should move towards democratic self-government. কি বলছে, what according to early nationalists was obstacle in India's progress? What kind of government did early nationalists demand? According to the early nationalists, the main obstacle in India's progress was social and economic backwardness of the Indians. The early Indians wanted a larger share in the government of the country, India. Their demands for constitutional reforms was conceded in 1892 in the form of Indian Councils Act. They believed that eventually India should move towards democratic self-government. State any two issues opposed by the early nationalists in the field of civil liberties. Two issues opposed by the early nationalists in the field of civil liberties were removal of restrictions imposed by the British government on the freedom of speech and freedom of press. Two issues opposed by early nationalists in the field of civil liberties. দুটো ইস্যুকে কিন্তু নাকচ করেছিল গভর্নমেন্ট, সেগুলো কি? রিমুভাল অফ রেস্ট্রিকশনস ইম্পোজড অন ব্রিটিশ গভর্নমেন্ট, imposed by British government on the freedom of speech and freedom of press, are abolition of the Preventive Detection Act and restoration of individual liberties. Abolition of Indian Councils Act. Na. Abolition of the Prevention Detection Act and restoration of individual liberties. Next, mention two demands of the early nationalists that aimed at improving the lot of the peasants. Reduction of land revenue and provision of credit to peasants. Improvement in the conditions of work of plantation workers. Reduction of land revenue and provision of credit to the peasants. Improvement in the conditions of work of plantation workers. Next question. Mention any two constitutional demands made by the early nationalists. Two constitutional demands made by the early nationalists were abolition of Indian Council, expansion of Legislative Council and Legislative Assemblies both at the center and in the province. Two constitutional demands made by the early nationalists were abolition of Indian Council, expansion of Legislative Council and Legislative Assemblies both at the center and in the provinces. Next question. Name any two economic issues raised by the early nationalists. Reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants against unjust demands of the zamindars. Two economic issues raised by the early nationalists: reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants against unjust demands of the zamindars, reduction in expenditure on the army and money thus saved to be spent on the welfare activities such as health and education. Expenditure army te কমাতে বলেছিল, which so that it could be saved, it could be spent, the saved amount could be spent on the welfare activities such as health and education. Next question. What did the early nationalists demand for the industrial growth of India? They demanded industrial growth through trade protection. This means that a heavy tax should be imposed on imported goods and the government should give loans for the development of iron, coal, paper, sugar industries in India. Mention any two achievements of the early nationalists. The early nationalists infused national consciousness among various sections of public life. They popularized the ideas of democracy, civil liberty, and representative institutions. Early nationalists infused national consciousness among various sections of the public life. They popularized the ideas of democracy, civil liberty, and representative institutions. who is known as India's unofficial ambassador and why? Dadabhai Nauroji came to be known as India's unofficial ambassador in England. Dadabhai Nauroji was one of the founders of Indian National Congress, presided over the sessions of Congress in 1886, 1893, and 1906. His presidency in 1906 was an effort to revive back the lost prestige of Congress owing to the partition of Bengal in 1905. Extremists who otherwise would have liked Tilak to hold the office of the president gave way to Dadabhai Nauroji, for he had established a name for himself. Dadabhai Nauroji came to be known as India's unofficial ambassador in England. Dadabhai Nauroji was one of the founders of Indian National Congress, presided over the sessions of Congress in 1886, 1993, and 1906. His presidency in 1906 was an effort to revive back the lost prestige of the Congress, owing to the partition of Bengal in 1905. Extremists who otherwise would have liked Tilak to hold the office of president gave way to Dadabhai Nauroji, for he had established a name for himself. Next question. Name the author of Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. A Nation in the Making, এই দুটোর author. Dadabhai Nauroji is the author of Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. Surendranath Banerjee was the author of, is the author of A Nation in Making. Surendranath Banerjee was the first Indian to pass Indian Civil Service examination in 1863. Surendranath Banerjee was the first Indian to pass Indian Civil Service examination in 1863. Name the two acts that Surendranath Banerjee agitated against. Surendranath Banerjee started agitation against the License Act and Vernacular Press Act. Surendranath Banerjee started agitation against the License Act and Vernacular Press Act. List briefly two causes that Gopal Krishna Gokhale supported. Two causes that Gopal Krishna Gokhale supported were reduction in salt duty and abolition of excise duty on cotton goods, reduction in land revenue. Reduction in salt duty and abolition of excise duty on cotton goods, reduction in land revenue. Mention any two shortcomings of the early nationalists. They used their beggarly methods of prayer and petitions. Two shortcomings of the early nationalists used their beggarly methods of prayer and petition. Secondly, early nationalists failed to realize any clash of interest between the Indians and the English. And the early nationalists used their beggarly methods of prayer and petition. Secondly, early nationalists failed to realize any clash of interests between the Indians and the English. Name the leader who was known as Grand Old Man of India. Dadabhai Nauroji was one of the pioneer statesmen, came to be known as Grand Old Man of India. Next question. What was the objective of the East India Association? East India Association was founded in 1866 with an objective to promote the interest and welfare of the Indians and to inform the British of the true state of affairs in India. Next question. State briefly the achievements of the East India Association. In England, Dadabhai Nauroji joined the Severed Learned Societies and Association. He founded East India Association. Dadabhai Nauroji founded the East India Association on December 1, 1866. He got a resolution passed in the British Parliament for holding preliminary examinations for ICS in India and England. So East India Association founded by in 1866. By Dadabhai Nauroji, and he got a resolution passed in British Parliament for holding preliminary examinations for ICS in India and England simultaneously. Name Dadabhai Nauroji's work. which exposed the economic exploitation of India by the British. Poverty and un-British rule in India exposed the economic exploitation of India by the British. His famous drain theory explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through various ways. Mention two contributions of Dadabhai Naoroji to the national movement. প্রথমেই হচ্ছে poverty and un-British rule in India কি হলো exposed the economic exploitation of India by the British. His famous drain theory explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through various ways. Two contributions of Dadabhai Naoroji in the national movement. Dadabhai Naoroji founded the East India Association in London. Dadabhai Naoroji founded the East India Association in London. Its main purpose was to foster the interests and welfare of the Indians. Its main purpose was to foster the interests of the welfare of the Indians. Dadabhai Naoroji has been ranked as the founder of Indian National Congress. He was elected president of Indian Congress thrice, and he was known as the Grand Old Man of India. He was elected president of Indian National Congress thrice, 1886, 1893, 1996. He was known as Grand Old Man of India. Next question. What was the drain theory referred to by Dadabhai Naoroji? Through this theory, explained how India's wealth was being taken away to England in these forms: salaries and petitions payable to the British soldiers, dispatch of savings to England by British personnel posted in India, payments to the War Office for maintenance of British troops in India, profits of British trading agencies. ড্রেন থিওরিতে এগুলোই বলেছে দাদাভাই নওরোজি। নেক্সট কোয়েশ্চেন, দ্য পিরিয়ড ফ্রম 1885 to 1905 was dominated by early nationalists. In this context, answer the following questions. To which section of the society they belonged? To what were their demands? What methods did they adopt? How did the early nationalists help in the growth of nationalism in India? The members of this group, মানে to which section of the society they belonged. The members of this group were drawn from educated middle class consisting of professionals like lawyers, barristers, teachers, officials. Many of them were educated in England and felt that British intended to be just to the Indians, but they were unaware of the true state of affairs in India. They demanded কি কি চাইলো ওরা? Constitutional reform, administrative reform, social religious reform, safeguarding the civil liberties, এইগুলো চেয়েছিল। এবার কনস্টিটিউশনাল রিফর্মস এর মধ্যে কি ছিল? Abolition of Indian councils, expansion of legislative councils created by the Act of 1861. Early in 20th century, the nationalists started demanding self-government on the model of self-governing colonies of Canada and USA. এগুলো ছিল কনস্টিটিউশনাল রিফর্ম। কি কি কনস্টিটিউশনাল রিফর্ম? অ্যাবলিশন অফ ইন্ডিয়ান কাউন্সিলস, expansion of legislative council. Abolition of Indian Council, expansion of Legislative Council. Early in the 20th century, the nationalists started demanding self-government on the mode of self-governing colonies of Canada and USA. Administrative reforms কি কি ছিল? Indianization of higher grades of Indian services, holding of simultaneous examinations both in England and India for recruitment of Indian civil services, separation of executive and judicial functions, adequate representation of Indians in executive council of the viceroy and the governors, increase in the power of local bodies. Administrative reforms কি কি ছিল? Indianization of higher grades of Indian offices, holding simultaneous examination both in England and in India for the recruitment of ICS, Indian Civil Service, মানে holding Indian Civil Service both simultaneously both in England and in India, separation of executive and judicial powers, adequate representation of Indians to Executive Council, increase in the power of local bodies. সোশিও রিলিজিয়াস রিফর্ম কি কি চেয়েছিল? সোশিও-রিলিজিয়াস রিফর্ম কি ছিল? রিডাকশন অফ ল্যান্ড রেভিনিউ অ্যান্ড প্রভিশন অফ চিফ ক্রেডিট টু পেজেন্টস, টোটাল অ্যাবলিশন অফ সল্ট ট্যাক্স অ্যান্ড ডিউটি অ্যান্ড সুগার, industrial growth through tariff protection and government aid, reduction in expenditure on army and utilize the same on social services like health and education. safeguarding the civil liberties, oppose the restrictions imposed by the British government on the freedom of speech and press. এবার safeguarding civil liberties এর মধ্যে কি কি পয়েন্ট আছে? Oppose the restrictions imposed by the British government on the freedom of speech and press, right to assemble and form associations. The methods adopted by the early nationalists were as follows. কি method ওরা adopt করলো? Constitutional method, constitutional agitation within the legal framework, and slow, orderly political progress. They to educate India in modern politics, to arouse national political consciousness, and to create a united public opinion. They relied on following methods. They held meetings where speeches were made and resolutions for popular demands were passed. They made use of press to criticize government policies. They sent memorandums and petitions to the government officials in the British Parliament. And these petitions were carefully drafted with facts and arguments. Though these petitions were addressed to the government, their real aim was to educate the Indian people. The early nationalists believed in the policy of constitutional agitation within the legal framework and slow, orderly political progress. To educate people in India in modern politics, to arouse national political consciousness, and to create a united public opinion, they relied on the following demands. They held meetings where speeches were made and resolutions for popular demands were passed. They made use of the press to criticize government policies. They sent memorandums and petitions to the government officials and the British Parliament. These petitions were carefully drafted with facts and arguments. Though these petitions were addressed to the government, their real aim was to educate the Indian people. Next question. To influence the British government and British public, they followed the following demands. Following methods. Method কি কি ছিল? Prayer, petition, protest. They sent petitions, requests, and letters of protest to the British government to look into the problems of the Indians. A British committee of the Indian National Congress was set up in London in 1889, which published a weekly journal, India, to present India's case before the British public. Deputations of the Indian leaders were sent to Britain. These political leaders carried on active propaganda in Britain. Next, how did the early nationalists help in the growth of nationalism in India? Early nationalists helped in the growth of nationalism in India the following ways. Nationalists created national awakening among people that they belonged to one common country, India. This made the Indians conscious of the bonds of common political, economic, and cultural interests and united them. Nationalists created national awakening among the people that they belonged to one common country, India. This made the Indians conscious of the bonds of common political, economic, and cultural interests that united them. They trained people in politics by popularizing the ideas of democracy, civil liberties, secularism, and nationalism. They did pioneering work by exposing the true nature of the British rule in India. They trained people in politics by popularizing the idea of democracy, civil liberty, secularism, and nationalism. They did pioneering work by exposing the true nature of the British rule in India. They made people realize the economic content and character of British imperialism. By doing so, they weakened the foundations of British rule in India. Their political and economic programs established the truth that India must be ruled in the interest of the Indians. Next, the efforts of early nationalists led to following reforms. The appointment of Public Service Commission in 1886, the resolution of House of Commons for simultaneous examinations to be held ICS examinations to be held simultaneously in both India and England, appointment of the Welby Commission of Indian Expenditure, appointment of the Wilby Commission on Indian Expenditure in 1895, Indian Councils Act of 1892, these এগুলো হচ্ছে achievements. Nationalists. এই যে ওদের জন্য এই যে আহ, মানে কি বলে ইন্ডিয়ান কাউন্সিলস অ্যাক্ট অফ 1892 আর simultaneous civil service examination were held started holding মানে were held in both India and England আর appointment of will by commission of Indian expenditure but early nationalists পরের কোয়েশ্চেনটা early nationalists were practical and wanted to win freedom by gradual process. In this context, answer the following. How did they expose the true nature of British rule in India? What was the attitude of early nationalists toward the British? Why did they develop such an attitude? What were the reasons for partial failure of their demands? The early nationalists played an important role in exposing the true nature of British rule in India. They did so of the following ways. Dadabhai Naoroji's views on Indian economy was given in his work entitled Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. Dadabhai Naoroji's views on Indian economy are given in his work entitled Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. His famous drain theory explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through various ways. Resolutions on self government, boycott, Swadeshi, national education were passed by the Congress under Dadabhai's presidency. Ki Dadabhai Naoroji's views on Indian economy are given in his work entitled Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. His famous drain theory explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through various ways. Resolutions on self-government, boycott, Swadeshi, national education were passed by the Congress under the leadership of Dadabhai Naoroji. Under Dadabhai Naoroji's presidency, the early nationalists criticized the British rule in newspapers, journals, and magazines. They wrote and entitled newspapers criticizing the unjust policies of British. Surendranath Banerjee started agitation against the License Act. Surendranath Banerjee started agitation against the License Act, Arms Act, and Vernacular Press Act, which aimed at curbing the nationalist activities of the people through his works. He made people aware of the colonial mindset of the British. Next question, Taki. What was the attitude of early nationalists towards the British? How did they develop such an attitude? The early nationalists had faith in the British justice and fair play and honesty and integrity. It was their hope that British would grant home rule to the Indians. They relied on the solemn pledges made by the British government. They believed that British rule had many benefits. For example, it aided in cleansing social evils like sati, untouchability, and child marriage. They were of the opinion that Britain would help Indian govern themselves according to the Western standards. They said that the main obstacle in India's progress was social and economic backwardness of the Indians and not the British colonial rule. They relied on constitutional and peaceful methods to achieve their aims. They believed in patience and reconstitution rather than in violence and confrontation. And they believed such an attitude towards British because they thought that continuation of British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. They had faith in the British sense of justice and fair play. Next, the reason for partial failure of methods followed by early nationalists were the methods used by the early nationalists of passing resolutions and sending petitions depended on the generosity of the British instead of relying on their own strength and challenging the imperialist might. They failed to realize that British and Indian interests clashed with each other. Britain was using India's resources to increase its wealth. The early nationalists failed to draw the masses to the mainstream of the national movement. Their area of influence was limited to the urban educated Indians. In particular, their leadership was confined to the professional groups such as lawyers, doctors, journalists, and teachers. Next question. Surendranath Banerjee is popularly known as the father of Indian nationalism. In this context, answer the following questions. Trace his contribution towards the formation of Indian National Congress. Surendranath Banerjee advocated the use of constitutional methods to attain India's goals. His contribution towards the formation of National Congress is significant. He established the Indian Association. Surendranath Banerjee established the Indian Association in 1876 to fight against the wrong policies of the British. In order to create an all India political organization, Surendranath convened the Indian National Conference in 1883 at Kolkata. His Indian National Conference marched with Indian National Congress in 1886 as both organizations had similar objectives. He presided over two sessions of the Congress in 1895 and 1902. His national conference marched with National Indian National Congress in 1886 as both organizations had similar objectives. Political goals. Surendranath Banerjee, like other early nationalists, called for the reforming of British administration, which would go a long way in winning gratitude of the Indian people. His goal as the right to self-government was based on firm assumption that Indians should have the right to mold their destiny. Should have the right to mold their destiny. He was the true worshipper of freedom and advocated complete independence from foreign rule. Method. Surendranath Banerjee had full faith in the honesty, integrity, and justice of the British. Thus, he advocated constitutional means for the attainment of his political goals. He urged Indians to boycott foreign goods and actively supported the Swadeshi movement. Surendranath Banerjee's contribution to India's freedom struggle is quite significant. He contributed to India's national movement in following ways. To fight against the wrong policies of the British, he founded the Indian Association in 1876. In order to create an all India political organization, Surendranath convened the Indian National Congress in 1883 at Kolkata. Surendranath Banerjee's Indian National Congress marched with an Indian National Congress in 1886 as both organizations had similar objectives. Surendranath convened the Indian National Conference in 1883 at Kolkata. Surendranath Banerjee's India's National Conference marched with Indian National Congress in 1886 as both organizations had similar objectives. Banerjee edited a newspaper, Bengali, which served as a popular medium for mobilizing public opinion. His book, Nation in the Making, gives an account of his political concern and his views over self government. Surendranath Banerjee started agitation against the License Act, Arms Act, Vernacular Press Act, against lowering the age from 21 to 19 years to appear in the ICS examination. He opposed the Montemillo reforms of 1909, which introduced separate electorates for the Hindus and the Muslims. He also opposed the division of Bengal by Lord Curzon in 1905. Next question. Who was Dadabhai Naoroji? According to Dadabhai Naoroji, in which sense security of life and poverty prevails in India? Dadabhai Naoroji was a prominent Indian political leader, social reformer, and an early nationalist who played a significant role in the Indian National Congress. According to Dadabhai Naoroji, the security of life and poverty in India existed in sense that people are Dadabhai Naoroji was a prominent Indian political leader, social reformer, early nationalist who played a significant role in the Indian National Congress. According to Dadabhai Naoroji, the security of life and poverty in India exists in the sense that people are protected from violence by each other or from native despots. Next, Dadabhai Naoroji propounded a theory to describe the exploitative nature of the British rule in India. Name it. Explain briefly in three lines the excerpt given above. According to the Nauroji, India is perfectly safe and secure because it can exploit India's resources. England is perfectly safe and secure because it can exploit Indian resources without any fear or threat. England extract substantial wealth from India both by exporting it and by consuming it within India without facing any significant risk or insecurity. Dadabhai Naoroji propounded the drain theory to describe the exploitative nature of British rule in India. The last line of the excerpt emphasizes the harsh reality faced by the millions of Indians, where life is characterized by half feeding, starvation, famine, and disease. This highlights the stark contrast between the illusion of security of life and poverty and property and the harsh conditions experienced by the Indian population due to British economic exploitation. Next question. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, the political mentor of Gandhiji, was one of the most popular early nationalist leaders. In this context, answer the following. State three policies of the imperial regime which were opposed by Gokhale. Policies of imperial regime opposed by Gokhale were incurring large expenditure on the English army, adopting the policy of racial discrimination in appointments to high posts, imposing production tax on cotton. And three policies of imperial regime which were opposed by Gokhale. Policies of imperial regime opposed by Gokhale were incurring huge expenditure on the English army are adopting the policy of racial discrimination in appointments to high posts, imposing production tax on cotton. Next, गोखेल की imperial regime के oppose করেছিল incurring huge expenditure on English army, adopting the policy of racial discrimination in appointments to high posts, মানে appointments of Indian to high post are imposing production tax on cotton. Next, role played by Gokhale as a member of Imperial Legislative Council. In 1902, Gokhale became the member of Imperial Legislative Council. He pleaded in the council for reduction in salt duty and abolition of excise duty on cotton goods. Pleaded in the council for reduction in salt duty and exercise of and abolition of excise duty on cotton goods. His relentless effort led to reduction in toll tax. He tried to induce a bill with a view to make primary education compulsory but could not achieve much success in it. Being an economist, he demanded radical changes in fiscal policy and better jobs for educated middle class, impressed upon the government to reduce land revenue. Gokhale set up. He trained the Servants of India Society. Trained the Servants of India Society founded in 1905 to arouse national awakening. He trained men to devote their lives to the cause of the country. The trained, not tained, বুঝতে পারছি না. He tained, but trained the Servants of India Society. Servants of India Society founded in 1905 to arouse national awakening. He trained men to devote their lives to the cause of the country. Secondly, its members were to create among the people deep and passionate love for the motherland. Thirdly and lastly, the society was to work for the education of women and elevation of the depressed classes. State Dadabhai Naoroji's contribution to India's freedom struggle under the following heads. His views about the nature. State Dadabhai Naoroji's contribution to India's freedom struggle under the following heads. his views about nature of British imperialism. Dadabhai Naoroji, though appreciative of Western education and construction of railways, openly criticized British rule for its bad effects on Indian economy. Indian handicrafts and textiles had been ruined. Dadabhai Naoroji edited Rast Goftar, mane speaking of truth, had also started a magazine Dharma Margdarshak, which were spoken on the effects of British imperialism. তাহলে কি Indian handicrafts and textiles had been ruined. Uh, Dadabhai Naoroji edited Rast Goftar, mane speaking of truth, Rastgoftar, edited Rast Goftar, and also started a magazine Dharma Margdarshak, which were spoken on the effects of British imperialism. Next question. His achievements in strengthening Indian nationalism. Dadabhai Naoroji was one of the founders of Indian National Congress, presided over the sessions of Congress in 1886, 1893, and 1996. His presidency in 1906 was an effort to revive back the lost prestige of Congress owing to the partition of Bengal in 1905. Extremists who otherwise would have liked Tilak to hold the office of president gave way to Dadabhai Naoroji, for he had established a name for himself. Dadabhai Naoroji's classic work Poverty and Un-British Rule in India reveals his famous concept drain theory. The theory explained how India's wealth was being taken away to England in the form of salaries payable to the members of the Indian Council, petitions to British officers, payment to the War Office for the maintenance of British troops in India, profits of British trading agencies. Next question. The methods of early nationalists were criticized as inadequate and half-hearted in this context. Briefly describe the following: nature of their methods, final outcome of their efforts. Nature of their methods. The early nationalists relied on constitutional and peaceful methods and avoided violence and confrontation. They made use of three P's: petitions, prayers, and protest to achieve their objectives. The final outcome of these efforts were national consciousness. Political education in India exposed true nature of British rule, acts of 1892, social reforms কি বলছে final outcome of their efforts কি their method কি ছিল constitutional method আর prayer petition protest আর final outcome কি ছিল it was Congress under early nationalists that promoted the spirit of common regional diversities. Faltu. They made great efforts to popularize ideas of democracy, representative institutions, and civil liberty. In the first session of Congress, W.C. Banerjee declared that Indians were to be governed on the ideals of government prevalent in England. The early nationalists in 19th century were being exploited at the hands of the British. Dadabhai Naoroji exposed the true nature of British imperialism in India in his theory of economic drain. এই first point হচ্ছে দাদাভাই Naoroji exposed the true nature of British imperialism in India in his theory of economic drain. In the first session of Congress, W.C. Banerjee declared that Indians wanted to be governed on the ideals of government prevalent in England. Government of India Act 1892 expanded the Legislative Council so far demanded by the early nationalists. Although the act failed to satisfy the early nationalists, yet it was improvement of Government of India Act 18 যাই হোক গভর্নমেন্ট অফ ইন্ডিয়ান অ্যাক্ট 1892 expanded the legislative councils. এটা একটা পয়েন্ট point number 1, W.C. Banerjee declared that Indians were to be governed on the ideals of government prevalent in England. এটা একটা final outcome ছিল ওদের এফর্টে. Second final outcome, Dadabhai Naoroji exposed the true nature of the British imperialism in India in his theory of economic drain. Point number 3, Government of India Act 1892 expanded the Legislative Council so far demanded by the early nationalists. Number four, early nationalists like Ranade and Gokhale were passionate supporters of social reform in India. They raised their voice against child marriage, imposed widowhood, and besides, they also supported the Age of Consent Bill of 1891. This period was the second seed of Indian nationalism. The role of early nationalists cannot be ignored. Next question. Early nationalists were practical and wanted to win freedom by a gradual process. Clinically examine the contribution of early nationalists using the following points. Exposing the true nature of British rule. The early nationalists followed the constitutional means to eradicate the grievances and tried to prove uselessness of making fodder of the brave youth of India to British guns. They emphasized the Indian case both in England and in India. Through their speeches and writings, they popularized public opinion to great concessions from the government. Now the people fully realized benefits that evils of the British rule and evils of the British rule. Next point, arousing political consciousness among the people. Arousing political consciousness among the people. The early nationalists created in India the feeling that they belonged to one common nation, to the Indian nation. They educated the Indians and aroused political consciousness among them. They gave them training in politics, political agitation, and struggle. Next, laying the foundation of national movement. The early nationalists laid a strong foundation of national movement to achieve freedom. They bound India into one single body who were ready for any sacrifice. They roused public awakening in India. Next question. Laying the foundation of national movement. কিভাবে they laid the foundation of the national movement? Sorry. The early nationalists laid strong foundation of a national movement to achieve freedom. They bound India into one single body who were ready for any sacrifice. They aroused political awakening in the Indians. The early nationalists saved India from being slaughtered by the English had not adopted peaceful means of agitation within constitutional limits. Next, Dadabhai Nauroji sacrificed his life, wealth, and job for the country. His selfless service filled the hearts of Indians. According to Gokhale, if there is the divine in man, it is Dadabhai Nauroji. Dadabhai Nauroji demanded Swaraj in 1906 from the platform of Congress in Calcutta. He was the first Indian to become the member of British Parliament. First Indian to become the member of British Parliament. Dada Bhai Nauroji. Gopal Krishna Gokhale established a society called Servants of India Society. It brought national unity and trained masses to work for the motherland. He criticized the policy of taxing the poor in India. Surendranath Banerjee, a great patriot, speaker, and journalist and educationalist, was very much influenced by the British and his rule. His Society India an association in 1876 around political consciousness and unity among the people. He raised his voice for the protection of poor farmers against exploitation by jamindars. Next question. Identify the person in the given picture. State three policies of the imperial regime which were opposed by the person. Gopal Krishna Gokhale. এই ছবিটা গোপাল কৃষ্ণ গোখলে criticized the government on issues of incurring huge expenditure on the British Army. Huge expenditure on the British Army তে স্পেন্ড করাতে বিরোধী ছিল. Adopting the policy of racial discrimination in appointments to high posts and imposing production tax on cotton. Role played by him as the member of Imperial Legislative Council. Role played by Gopal Krishna Gokhale as member of Imperial Legislative Council. In 1902, Gokhale became the member of Imperial Legislative Council. In 1902, Gokhale became the member of the Imperial Legislative Council. He pleaded the council for reduction in salt duty and in abolition of excise duty on cotton goods. His relentless efforts led to the reduction of toll tax. He impressed upon the government to reduce land revenue. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a prominent leader in Indian independence movement during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, endeavored to arouse national awakening for several key reasons. Political awareness, educational reform, social and economic reforms. Gokhale believed that the Indian masses needed to be politically aware and informed about their rights and responsibilities. He aimed to create a politically conscious citizenry that could actively participate in shaping the destiny of the nation. Educational reform ki Gokhale was a strong advocate of educational reforms. He believed that a well-educated population was crucial for the progress and development of the nation. By promoting education, especially among the masses, he sought to empower Indians intellectually and foster a sense of national identity. Social and economic reforms. Gokhale recognized the importance of addressing social and economic issues. He advocated for social reforms to eradicate practices like untouchability and work towards improving the economic conditions of the masses. His emphasis on these reforms aimed at creating a more just and equitable society. Imagine that you got a chance to interview one of the early nationalist leaders. On the basis of the interview, express your views on the early nationalist leaders as well as the methods used by him. I interviewed Dadabhai Nauroji. Based on the interview, there are some views on his beliefs and methods. He had faith in the British justice and fair play, honesty and integrity of the British. He relied on the solemn pledges of the British and hoped that they would grant home rule to India. He believed in constitutional and peaceful methods to achieve the aim of home rule. He believed in patience and reconciliation rather than violence and confrontation. Through his works, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, his famous drain theory he explained how India's wealth was being drained to England through different ways. As a member of British Parliament, he brought to notice of the House important matters related to India. He was India's unofficial ambassador to Britain. He founded London India Society and East India Association in London to further the cause of India in Britain. Next question. Suppose you want to present the demands of the people of your area to the MLA of your area. State which methods followed by the early nationalists you would choose and why. The methods I would choose to present the demands of the people to MLA would be I would send a letter containing the demand of the people along with the reason for each demand, clearly explaining the problems faced by the people currently. I would request the MLA to visit my area, see the problems himself, and interact with a few people to get a first hand experience of the issues. After that, I would arrange for a meeting between the MLA and select a few people of his area or of his residents to further persuade him to look into the demands. I would choose these methods because in democracy we resolve issues through dialogues within the constitutional framework following the legitimate means. Now, I'll read out the last questions. Mention two achievements of the moderates. They were successful in arousing political awakening and national consciousness among the Indians. They were successful in unifying most of the Indians for the common cause. Who's called the Grand Old Man of India, Dadabhai Nauroji, who was known as India's unofficial ambassador to England, Dadabhai Nauroji. Mentioned two contributions of Dadabhai Nauroji to the national movement. He was one of the earliest Indian leaders to hold view that poverty of Indian people was the result of exploitation of India by the British and the drain of India's wealth to Britain. He started movements against the Vernacular Press Act and atrocious treatment of the zamindars with the poor peasants. Next question. Name the moderate leader who explained the economic drain theory during colonial time. Dadabhai Naoroji, who was called the father of nationalist movement in India. Father of the nationalist movement in India, Surendranath Banerjee, who founded the Servants of India Society, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who founded the Servants of India Society, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, mentioned two reasons for moderates' faith in British sense of justice. The English were just and freedom-loving people. They had an abiding faith in British sense of justice and fair play and believed in loyalty to the British Crown. They believed that simply by presenting and pleading their cases before the British Parliament and the British people, justice would be done and their grievances would be redressed. Name two books that Dadabhai Naoroji authored explaining the drain of India's wealth. Poverty and British Rule in India, magazine Dharma Margdarshak. Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, magazine Dharma Margdarshak. Next question. The period from 1885 to 1907 is called the period of moderates. In this context, explain the following. Why was this period called the period of moderates? The period from 1885 to 1907 was called the moderate phase because the movement was confined to a handful of educated middle class who were inspired by the Western educational liberal thinkers. The period from 1885 to 1907 was called the moderate phase because the movement was confined to a handful of educated middle class lawyers, teachers, barristers, who were inspired by Western educational liberal thinking. All of the demands of the Congress were of moderate character. The methods of struggle during the period were of moderate character. The leaders carried their agitation through prayers, petitions, and protest. Next, demands. The principal demands of the moderates may be classified as under. Principal demands of the moderates. The Congress asked for expansion of legislative council created by the Act of 1861 and making them representative by including some members of the local bodies, chambers of commerce, universities. So the Congress asked for expansion of legislative council created by the Act, Legislative Council Act in 1861. They demanded that all legislative measures and all financial measures, including budget, should be submitted to this council. Abolition of Indian Council. Complete separation of executive and judicial functions. They laid stress on colonial form of self-government which was prevalent in the dominions of Canada and Australia. They laid stress on colonial form of self-government which was prevalent in the dominions of Canada and Australia. Administrative reform কি কি ওরা চেয়েছিল? They demanded for wider employment of the Indians in the higher services. Their major demand was that ICS examination should be held simultaneously both in England and in India. Repeal of the Arms Act. They demanded for more jobs for the Indians in the army and raising the Indian volunteer force. Next, economic reforms or demands. The early leaders blamed the imperial government for growing economic backwardness of the country. They demanded economic reform. Some of them were more funds for technical education, abolition of salt tax, reduction in land revenue and expenditure in military, an inquiry in India, growing poverty and famines, improvement in the conditions of the work of plantation workers, to end the unfair tariffs and excise duties, extension of the permanent settlement, to end the unfair tariffs and excise duties. এবার ডিফেন্স অফ সিভিল সার্ভিসের কি কি বলেছিল, মানে কি কি ডিমান্ড করেছিল? দ্য মডারেটস ফার্মলি অপোজড দ্য রেস্ট্রিকশনস imposed by the British government on the freedom of speech, press and association. They demanded the scrapping of the Prevention Detection Act and restoration of individual liberties. এই যে প্রিভেন্টিভ ডিটেনশন অ্যাক্ট, এইটার মানে হচ্ছে প্রিভেন্টিভ ডিটেনশন অ্যাক্ট মানে স্বাধীনতাটা পুরো হস্তক্ষেপ করে মানে করা, স্পিচ প্রেসের উপর যে ফ্রিডম সেটা নষ্ট করে দেওয়া। রেস্টোরেশন অফ ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল লিবার্টিস, প্রিভেন্টিভ ডিটেকশন অ্যাক্টের ওরা আগেনস্টে ছিল অ্যান্ড দেওয়া in favor of restoration of individual liberties. About methods of the moderates. The attitude of the moderates was not anti-British. They believed that the British government could be persuaded to see justness of their demands and concede them. To attain these demands, they passed resolutions and they they to attain these demands they passed resolutions and prepared petitions which they sent to the government for consideration. Leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji popularized the demands of the Congress even in England and tried to get the support of the British public. Next, একটা ছবি দিয়েছে ছবি দিয়ে who was known as India's unofficial ambassador to England. Dadabhai Naoroji, the Grand Ruler Man of India, was known as India's unofficial ambassador to England. Next question. What were his views on the cause of poverty in India? Dadabhai Naoroji was a great economic thinker. His views on the Indian economy can be gathered from his classic work, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. Through the famous drain theory, explained that India's wealth was being taken away to England in various forms like salaries payable to the members of Indian Council, dispatch of savings to England by British personnel posted in India, petitions to British officers, payments to the War Office for the maintenance of British troops in India, profits of British trading agencies. Next question. Mention his achievements in strengthening India's nationalism. He was one of the foremost leaders. Dadabhai Naoroji was one of the foremost leaders of the Congress for about 20 years. Thrice he presided over the sessions of the Congress. He was one of the earliest Indian leaders to hold the view that the poverty of Indian people was the result of exploitation of India by the British and his drain of India's wealth to Britain. He started movements against the Vernacular Press Act and atrocious treatment of the zamindars with the poor peasants. That credit for demanding Swaraj from Congress platform goes to Dadabhai Naoroji. Ki the credit for demanding Swaraj from the Congress platform in 1906 goes to Dadabhai Naoroji. He helped in making the national movement more rigorous because four resolutions on self-government, boycott, Swadeshi, national education were passed by the Congress under his presidentship. Next, identify this person in the given picture. Surendranath Banerjee, named the moderate leader who was known as the Indian Bark, Burke. Surendranath Banerjee is often called the Indian Bark, Burke. Mention his efforts to arouse national awakening in strengthening national movement. এবার সুরেন্দ্রনাথ ব্যানার্জি শুরু হচ্ছে Surendranath Banerjee took an active part in freedom movement of India. He was a great patriot, a speaker, a journalist, an educationalist, an organizer, and a political agitator. The Surendranath Banerjee founded the Indian Association in 1876, which helped in educating the people to arouse political consciousness and unity among the Indian. Founded the Indian Association in 1876. The Surendranath Banerjee was of the opinion that masses should be included in national movement. Surendranath Banerjee organized popular demonstrations and started agitations against License Act, Arms Act, Vernacular Press Act, and against lowering the age from 21 years to 19 years for ICS examination. Surendranath Banerjee was in favor of Hindu-Muslim unity and was of the opinion that the disunity between these would hamper the growth of national movement. Surendranath Banerjee opposed the Minto-Morley reforms in 1909, which introduced separate electorates for the Hindus and the Muslims. He also opposed the division in Bengal. Surendranath Banerjee opposed the Monte-Minto reforms of 1909, which introduced separate electorates for the Hindus and the Muslims. He also opposed the division of Bengal. এবার Surendranath Banerjee belonged to the moderate group of Congress. He pleaded for modernization and constitutional means for the attainment of India's goal. He used to lay opposition where necessary, cooperation where possible. He used to say opposition where necessary, cooperation where possible. Surendranath Banerjee. He was not in favor of violent activities. He was in favor of boycott and Swadeshi movements. Next. ছবি দিয়েছে গোপাল কৃষ্ণ গোখলে দাদাভাই নওরোজি মানেই হচ্ছে টুপি হ্যাঁ সুরেন্দ্রনাথ ব্যানার্জি দুজনেই কিন্তু দাদাভাই নওরোজি সুরেন্দ্রনাথ ব্যানার্জি দুজনেরই কিন্তু দাঁড়িয়ে আছে তার মধ্যে দাদাভাই নওরোজির টুপি আছে সুরেন্দ্রনাথ ব্যানার্জির টুপি নেই আর গোপাল কৃষ্ণ গোখলে এটা গোপাল কৃষ্ণ গোখলে নয় তো, এটা বাল গঙ্গাধর তিলক বলে না, গোপাল কৃষ্ণ গোখলেই। Political guru of Gandhi, who's known as the political guru of Gandhi. Political guru of Gandhi, Gopal Krishna Gokhale. He established the Servants of India Society, Servants of India Society, 1905. Objectives of the society: the society trained people to devote their lives to the cause of the country. The society assisted educational movements, especially those for the education of women. The society worked for the upliftment of depressed classes. He opposed the policy of British government whenever necessary. He opposed toll tax. He criticized the government for incurring huge expenditure on the British English army, for adopting the policy of racial discrimination and ignoring elementary education. In 1910 and 12, he moved resolutions in the Imperial Legislative Council for relief to Indian bonded labor in Natal. 1910 and 1912, he moved resolutions in the Imperial Legislative Council for relief to Indian bonded labor in Natal. It was largely due to Gopal Krishna Gokhale's political moderation and cooperation he extended to the government that it made recognize the Congress as forum responsible for Indian the Bekar. দরকার নেই আর. He was deeply pained to see the increasing misery of the peasants. He pleaded for the reduction of land revenue. He laid great stress on encouraging industry and on appointing India to high posts so that money saved could be used for the welfare of the people. Gokhale was in favor of state protection to infant Indian industries. মানে infant Indian industry কে protect করতে চাইতো. Goal of the Congress and means to achieve his goal. Gokhale, like other moderate leaders, had immense faith in British rule. Gokhale urged that the growth of the Congress could be attainment of that form of government similar to that which existed in self-governing colonies of British Empire. He wanted to achieve the goal by constitutional means. The constitutional means include petitions, appeals to justice, and passive resistance. In 1912, Gokhale went to South Africa where he helped Gandhiji in his fight against racial discrimination. The credit of persuading Gandhiji to return to India and join Indian public life also goes to Gokhale. Next, describe the achievements of moderates. Foundation of secular and democratic national movement. The early nationalist leaders established a movement that incorporated people of all religions, caste, creed, regions, and color. They were successful in promoting the spirit of commerce, common brotherhood, suppressing religious and political and regional diversities. They were successful to a great extent in arousing political awakening and national consciousness among the Indians. They popularized the idea of democracy and civil liberties among the people of India. They were the first in 19th century to develop an economic technique of colonialism. They tried their best to popularize the ideas of democracy, civil liberty, and representative institutions. The moderates like Govind Ranade, Gopal Krishna Gokhale were passionate supporters of social reforms in India. They raised their voice against social evils and child marriage sati system. Their efforts resulted in the appointment of Public Service Commission uh, and মানে simultaneously যে ইয়ে হয়েছিল both in India and England, and appointment of Wellby Commission on Indian expenditure. এই যে achievements of the moderates, because of them the appointment of Wellby Commission on Indian expenditure happened in 1895. Mention any four basic beliefs of early nationalists. The English was এই belief গুলোদের ছিল English was just and freedom loving people. They had an abiding faith in British sense of justice and fair play and believed in the loyalty to British crown. They believed that simply by presenting and pleading their case before the British Parliament and British people, justice would be done and their grievances would be redressed. The Congress was proud of their British connections and looked to England for inspiration and guidance. They recognized the benefits of the English rule, especially the English language and modern means of transport and communication. They also tried to purge the society of all its ills like child marriage, sati, and untouchability.